What kind of parents look their child in the eye and say, "You're not worth it"? For years, I held on to the belief that, deep down, my parents still loved me. That even if they didn't understand me, even if they always favored my sister, Ashley, they still cared. But that illusion shattered the night I finally asked them for help. I was 20, in my junior year of college, juggling 3 part-time jobs just to keep up with tuition. I had never asked my parents for a single dollar, but that semester, I was short, just $2,000. So I swallowed my pride and brought it up at dinner. My mother barely looked up. She let out an exhausted sigh, something about how I had chosen this path and needed to deal with it myself. My father stayed silent, the way he always did when she spoke for both of them. Then, right as I was still processing the rejection, Ashley's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, grinned, and casually mentioned that their payment for her entire tuition had just gone through. That's when it hit me. The difference had always been there. I just refused to see it. Ashley got everything. The best schools, the best clothes, the best future. Me? I wasn't worth the investment. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just nodded, stood up, and walked away. Upstairs, I threw whatever I could into a bag, took one last look around the bedroom I grew up in, and left. No one stopped me. No one even asked where I was going. That was the moment I understood I was never really part of this family to begin with. This is the true story of Melody Sinclair, originally shared on our /am_asshole, one of Reddit's biggest communities for real-life moral dilemmas. Her post went viral, sparking heated debates and thousands of reactions. Before we continue, if you love stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Reddit True Vault. Your support helps bring more incredible stories to life. Growing up, my family looked perfect from the outside. A nice 2-story home with a white picket fence in the suburbs of Nashville. Holiday photos with coordinated outfits. Backyard barbecues in the summer. But the reality? My parents only cared about one thing: status. And to them, I was never part of that equation. My younger sister, Ashley, was everything they ever wanted in a daughter. Smart, ambitious, the picture of success. They sent her to private schools, hired personal tutors, bought her designer clothes while I wore hand-me-downs. Every birthday, every holiday, every achievement of hers was celebrated like she'd just won an Olympic gold medal. She had one dream: to be a doctor. And in my parents' eyes, that meant she was worth investing in. They covered every penny of her tuition at a top medical school without hesitation. New laptop? Paid for. Rent for a downtown apartment? No problem. Anything she needed, she got, without even asking. Because Ashley was going places. I wasn't like Ashley. I didn't want to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or some high-powered executive they could brag about. I wanted to be a musician. Music was my escape, my passion. I spent hours at the piano, composing my own pieces. When I got a scholarship to study music at a well-respected university, I thought, just for a moment, that maybe they'd be proud of me too. I was wrong. Music isn't a real career, my mother had said, shaking her head like I had announced I wanted to join a circus. You can't just play piano and expect to survive in the real world, my father added. They refused to help me. Not a cent. Not for tuition, not for books, not even for a meal plan. They told me if I wanted to waste my time on a hobby, I could figure it out on my own. So I did. I worked late nights at a coffee shop, then played piano at a jazz bar downtown until 2 a.m., just to afford rent, food, and the scraps of tuition my scholarship didn't cover. I never complained. I never asked for anything. Until that night. It was Ashley's college celebration dinner. My parents had gone all out. A fancy home-cooked meal, a banner that said, "Congratulations, Dr. DeB," and expensive wine. And me? I was just there, sitting quietly, waiting for a chance to speak. My stomach was in knots when I finally said it. I need help with tuition this semester. Just this once. I've done everything on my own, but I'm short by $2,000. Silence. Then my mother sighed, annoyed, like I had just asked for something absurd. She said something about how I had chosen this path, how I had always managed before, how I should figure it out myself. My father didn't even look at me. He just kept reading his newspaper. And then Ashley's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, smirked, and turned it toward my mother. Full tuition payment confirmed. I felt my face go numb. They had just paid tens of thousands of dollars for Ashley's private medical school. And yet, I was being told $2,000 was too much to ask. I turned to my mother, barely able to form words. Why? Why is it so different for her? She didn't hesitate. She didn't soften the blow. Your sister has a future. You don't. I think I actually stopped breathing for a second. Ashley laughed, shaking her head. Something about how spending money on me would be a waste. I don't even remember what happened next. I just remember standing up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and walking away. Upstairs, I packed whatever I could fit into my old backpack. Clothes, my laptop, my sheet music. I took one last look around my childhood room. There were old piano competition certificates on the wall. No family photos. Then I walked out the front door. No one stopped me. No one even asked where I was going. And that was the moment I knew. I was done trying to belong to a family that never wanted me. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have a destination. I just walked. My backpack dug into my shoulders, heavy with the little I owned. My mind kept replaying the last thing my mother had said. Your sister has a future. You don't. The words echoed in my head, twisting into something even worse. You don't matter. You never did. By the time I reached the edge of town, my hands were shaking from the cold. Or maybe from the weight of it all finally sinking in. I had nowhere to go. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with flickering neon lights and a front desk clerk who barely looked up when I slid a crumpled $20 bill across the counter. The room smelled like cigarette smoke and old carpet. The bed creaked when I sat on it, the springs digging into my back. But I didn't care. I curled up in my hoodie, staring at the stained ceiling, and tried not to cry. I failed. I cried so hard my chest ached. I cried for the little girl who just wanted her parents to be proud of her. For the teenager who worked herself to exhaustion, thinking that maybe if she was good enough, they'd finally see her. I cried because, for the first time in my life, I was completely alone. Then my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it. I figured it was just another pointless notification, some random spam email, or a bank alert reminding me I was broke. But it wasn't. Eleanor Wilson, my old music teacher, come to my house. You're not alone. I read the message 3 times, my hands trembling. Then, for the first time that night, I let out a shaky breath. Because maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely lost. Eleanor welcomed me in like I was family. No judgment, no pity, just a warm hug and a place to sleep. But I knew I couldn't stay forever. I spent the next few weeks searching for any job I could find. And let me tell you, when you're broke, sleep-deprived, and running on nothing but cheap coffee, rejection hits different. We're not hiring right now. We need someone with experience. Check back next month. I heard it all. I ended up working back-to-back shifts at a cafe during the day, then playing piano at a rundown jazz bar at night. I barely slept. Some nights, I crashed on a worn-out couch in the bar's storage room because I was too tired to make it home. There were weeks where I could only afford 1 meal a day. Cheap instant ramen. A plain bagel with no cream cheese. Whatever was left over from the cafe's closing shift. I'd play my heart out at the piano, pouring every ounce of pain, exhaustion, and frustration into my music, only to be ignored by a half-drunk crowd that didn't give a damn. And still, I didn't quit, because no matter how hard it got, no matter how much I wanted to scream or break down or just give up, there was one thought that kept me going. I will prove them wrong. I started recording my songs on a secondhand laptop, posting them online late at night when the world was quiet. At first, no one cared. 0 views. A handful of likes. The occasional pity comment from a stranger. But I kept posting. I sent my demos to every indie label, every producer, every contact I could find. And the responses? Not the right fit. We're looking for something more commercial. You have potential, but you're not there yet. Rejection after rejection. Months turned into years. I worked. I played. I recorded. I sent more emails. And still, nothing. Until one night. It was around 2 a.m. I had just finished another long shift, my fingers sore from playing for tips that barely covered bus fare. I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at my laptop screen, debating whether I should even bother uploading my latest song. It was raw. Imperfect. Just me, my piano, and all the pain I'd carried since the night I walked out of my parents' house. I named it No Value, because that's what they told me I had. I hit upload, shut my laptop, and went to sleep, assuming it would disappear into the void like all the others. But this time, something was different. I woke up to thousands of notifications. My video had blown up. People were sharing it, commenting, messaging me. This song broke me. I've never related to lyrics more. Who is she? Where can I hear more? My inbox was flooded. And buried beneath the chaos was one message that made my heart stop. Marcus Reed, a music producer. A real one. You have something special. Let's make this big. I read it 5 times, my hands shaking. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to cry. Instead, I just whispered to myself, I did it. I actually fking did it. Asterisk. I met with Marcus the next week. He didn't promise me fame. He didn't sugarcoat anything, but he looked me in the eye and said, "You've worked harder than most artists I've seen. If you're ready to put in the work, we can make this happen." And that was it. For years of exhaustion, hunger, rejection, and self-doubt for this moment. I signed my first record deal that day, and when I walked out of that office, stepping into the sunlight, I thought about my parents. I thought about my mother's voice saying, "Spending money on you would be a waste." And I smiled, because I had never been a waste. I was just waiting for the world to see my worth. I had almost forgotten about my family. Almost. For years had passed since I packed my bags and walked out of that house. Since I stood in the rain with nothing but a backpack and a broken heart, vowing I'd never look back. And I hadn't, until the day I met Ryan for coffee. Ryan Sinclair, my cousin. The only family member who had ever treated me like a person instead of an afterthought. We were never particularly close, but growing up, he was one of the few people who didn't look at me like I was some kind of mistake. We'd exchange messages once in a while. Just quick check-ins. Nothing deep. Then, out of the blue, he asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee. It felt different. When we sat down, I could tell something was off. He looked tired, older in a way that had nothing to do with age. After some small talk, he finally got to the point. Had I talked to them? I nearly laughed. No. And I wasn't planning to. He let out a breath, like he expected that answer. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. They weren't doing well. I frowned. What did that even mean? Ryan hesitated, like he was trying to find the right way to say it. My dad had lost his job over a year ago. My mom hadn't worked in ages. And Ashley, she had dropped out. I blinked. Ashley dropped out. Apparently, the pressure of med school had been too much. But not before she racked up 3 years' worth of tuition and student loans. I let that sink in. And then, because old habits die hard, I asked the question that had been drilled into me since childhood. What about the house? Ryan just shook his head. The mortgage, the credit card debt, the loans, everything was catching up. I should have felt something. Sadness, concern, but all I felt was nothing. Just a cold, detached sense of recognition. And then I asked the real question. Why was he telling me this? Ryan hesitated again. Then he looked me straight in the eye and said it. Because they were going to reach out to me. Not because they missed me. Not because they wanted me back. But because now, after all this time, I was finally valuable to them. Ryan was right. That night, my phone lit up with a message from my mother. "We miss you. Let's talk." I stared at the screen for a long time. For years of silence. For years of being nothing to them. And now, just like that, they missed me. I didn't reply. The next day, my phone rang. Dad. I let it ring. Then, on impulse, I scrolled back through our old messages. There were only 2 texts. One from 3 years ago. I had never opened it. Something in my chest tightened as I clicked on it, watching the words appear on my screen. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a check-in. It was about Ashley. Her new apartment. The celebration they were throwing for her. And the only reason he had texted me? To make sure I didn't embarrass the family. I laughed. A full, bitter laugh that echoed through my apartment. Of course, even back then, the only time he had reached out to me was to protect their image. And now, for years later, he was calling. On a whim, I answered. I barely had time to say hello before he launched into it. How things were bad. How they were struggling. How they could really use my help. I cut him off. I already knew why he was calling. There was a long pause. And then, like it was supposed to mean something, he said it. "We're family." I almost laughed again. I could have exploded. I could have let loose every ounce of anger I had been carrying for years. But I didn't. I just exhaled. Steady. Slow. Then I told him the truth. "No, Dad. We're not." And then I hung up. I blocked the number. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. I didn't expect to see them. Not here. Not now. I had just finished my set. The stage lights still burned in my vision. My pulse still thrummed with the high of performing for a sold-out crowd. The applause still echoed in my ears. The adrenaline still ran through my veins. And then I stepped off stage and saw them waiting. My mother. My father. Ashley, standing there in the dim glow of the backstage hallway like ghosts from a past I had buried. For years ago, just seeing them would have shattered me. I would have looked at my mother's eyes, searching for warmth. I would have held my breath, hoping my father would say something. Anything. That proved I still mattered. For years ago, I would have clung to hope. Now, I felt nothing. I stopped walking. My security team glanced at me for confirmation, waiting for my cue. I could have left. I could have told them to get these people out of here, but I didn't. I needed to hear what they had to say. Not for them. For me. So I stayed. Ashley spoke first, or she tried to. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then glanced at our parents. Like she wasn't sure if she should be playing the apologetic little sister or the manipulative golden child. Then my mother stepped forward. She said my name like it was foreign on her tongue, like she wasn't sure it belonged to me anymore. Melody, we just wanted to see you. Liar. They hadn't wanted to see me in 4 years. Not when I was struggling. Not when I was sleeping in a dingy studio apartment, barely making rent, running on 3 hours of sleep between shifts. They wanted to see me now, because now, I was valuable. Now, I was worth something. I didn't respond. I just crossed my arms and waited. She took it as an invitation to keep going. We heard about everything. She motioned vaguely, like she couldn't even say the words. Your success. Your music. We're so proud of you, sweetheart. Sweetheart. I almost laughed. That was what she called Ashley. I had never been her sweetheart, but I let her continue. She talked about how the past was the past, how people make mistakes, how family should stick together, no matter what, how my father had lost his job and Ashley had dropped out and the house was slipping away. And finally, how they needed my help. There it was. I exhaled slowly. Then I glanced at Ashley. She wouldn't even look me in the eye. Interesting. I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. Then I asked, you remember what you told me 4 years ago? A flicker of something. Shame, maybe, crossed my mother's face. I turned to my father instead. 3 years ago, I continued, you texted me. Do you remember what it was about? He swallowed. Didn't answer, so I did it for him. You didn't ask if I was okay. You didn't wonder if I was struggling. You didn't check in. No, you wanted to make sure I came to Ashley's housewarming party so I wouldn't embarrass the family. Silence. Ashley finally looked at me then, jaw tight. I took a step forward, lowered my voice, and now you want my help. I let the words sink in. Funny how that works. Then I turned to leave. That's when my father finally spoke. Melody, please. We're family. I stopped, looked over my shoulder, and then I said the words that had been waiting on my tongue for years. 4 years ago, you told me I wasn't worth investing in. I let the pause stretch out, let them feel the weight of it. Now, I'll say the same thing to you. Then I walked away. I didn't turn back. I didn't check if they were crying. For the first time in my life, they didn't matter anymore. And damn, that felt good. There was a time when I thought success would feel like revenge, that every concert, every award, every headline with my name on it would be a knife in their hearts, that they would see me on stage, hear my voice echo through arenas, and realize what they had thrown away. I used to think that moment would be satisfying, but the truth? It wasn't, because by the time they finally looked at me and saw my worth, I had already stopped needing their validation. A year after that final confrontation, I stood on a stage again. But this time, it wasn't for a sold-out concert. It was for something bigger. The launch event for the True Value Foundation. Beside me stood Eleanor Wilson, the woman who gave me a roof over my head when my own parents wouldn't. The woman who believed in me before anyone else did. She smiled as I stepped up to the microphone. Music saved me. And now, it's my turn to give back. The room erupted into applause, but I wasn't performing. I was building a future. The True Value Foundation wasn't just a scholarship fund. It was a movement, a network of musicians, producers, educators, and industry professionals working together to make sure that talented artists, no matter their background, had a fighting chance. We partnered with recording studios to give young artists access to professional equipment. We created mentorship programs, pairing students with established musicians who could guide them, not just in their craft, but in the brutal realities of the industry. We launched the Rising Voices Tour, a series of concerts featuring young, undiscovered talent, giving them the exposure and experience that I had to claw my way to get. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone, because now, I was the one making space, the one making sure that no one else had to hear the words, "You're not worth it." What happened to my family? I get asked this a lot. What happened to them? Do they ever reach out? The answer is yes. But I don't answer back. The last I heard, my mother works at a supermarket, ringing up customers who wouldn't recognize her name. My father lost the house and now rents a one-bedroom apartment with barely enough space for his pride. Ashley works 3 jobs, buried under student loan debt that nobody is paying for this time. Do I feel bad for them? No, they were never struggling when I was. They never lost sleep wondering how they'd make rent. They never counted every single penny just to survive. I did. So no, I don't feel bad. Actions have consequences, and sometimes, karma doesn't need any help. People assume my story is about revenge, that I did all this just to prove them wrong. But that's not the lesson. This isn't about them. It never was. This is about choosing yourself, about knowing your worth, even when the people who should love you most refuse to see it. It's about refusing to beg for scraps of love from those who were never willing to give it. And most importantly, it's about building the life you deserve. Because in the end, Value isn't something others give you. It's something you create for yourself. And I did. And now, I'm making sure others can too. Melody's story isn't just about success. It's about breaking free. It's for every person who has ever been told they weren't enough. For everyone who has ever fought for love that was never given freely. For everyone who stayed, hoping things would change until they realized they never would. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Not with anger, not with hate, but with clarity. With the understanding that you deserve more. That your worth isn't measured by someone else's approval. That the family you build will always matter more than the one that never chose you. And if you're still waiting for them to see your value, stop. Because the moment you start choosing yourself, you've already won. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share your story in the comments. We're listening. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Reddit True Vault. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life.